We wanted to start to talk some about how waivers are changing. I mentioned that the governor signed an executive order for technology. So beginning on January 1, and they've already started, we brought the rule, and I'm a rule geek, so I like to read the rules. Well, I do this at night. That helps me sleep. But beginning January 1, if you have a waiver, the county board is first going to try to offer you technology versus a staff person. Doesn't mean you're not going to get a staff person. But they're going to have a rule obligation to offer you technology first. That's for a couple reasons. Turnover in these group homes is over 60% now. Wow. So even if you find the salaries are so low that our direct care staff qualify for Medicaid themselves often. We're talking $9 an hour, 10, maybe $11 an hour. So,
and it's not that people want to pay that necessarily, it's just the reimbursement rate is what it is. I mean, if your reimbursement rate through the Medicaid system, the waiver system is $15 and somebody's working for an agency, of course they're not, if that's all they can bill, they're not going to pay somebody 15. They just can't. They got to stay in business, right? So most of the rate is $9, $10 out there and that's why there's a 61% turnover rate.
And each of our waivers includes a technology component. So maybe you can talk a little bit about the rule and what kind of technology.
Sure. So the rule is what we would consider an assistive tech, AT technology rule. And like Gary said, it's changed. And there's various things you can get regarding technology. Like I mentioned to you, there's something used to be called remote monitoring, but we kind of got rid of that term because people hear monitoring, they think, oh, somebody's watching me all the time. So it's called remote supports. And then there's what we would call basic assistive technology that you can get through a provider that's kind of off the shelf. So for example, if I pulled my phone up, I can look at something in my home where I can actually pull up a Nest Cam. And so it's just something that uses an IP address through the internet, and then I can check in. I can be out, maybe I can go to the grocery store. I can get that respite, but that technology allows me as the parent to have some kind of peace of mind and be able to check in. And also it gives my loved one that freedom. Maybe he or she doesn't want necessarily a staff person with them all the time. So that's just another kind of tool we say in the toolbox, but it's something that counties are going to look at first to say, hey, maybe this is something, and again, it's based on that person's needs. Not everybody's going to have technology, not everybody's going to need technology. It's just based on the person's need.
So the other new type of residential services is something called shared living, because the growth of the era of group homes has slowed down, partly because of the high turnover, partly because I got to live with 3 other people who happen to have disabilities that I never met before I moved in. The rest of the world has been using shared living for decades. Ohio was relatively new to this. Shared living is either I have to have an IO waiver, just like I would have to have if I were living in a group home. But an IO waiver says that if I want to continue to live with my parents, but one of my parents probably can't have another job because I do have a disability, then my parents can essentially become like foster parents for me. I have to be at least 18, I have to be on an IO waiver, but my mom has a contract with either the state or a private agency, and she receives a daily rate for me to continue living at home. So I use my SSI or my Social Security to pay room and board, and my mom gets a daily rate, maybe $100 a day, so that I can continue to live at home. It's a way to keep the family together longer. Or the other way is, I'm 19, I have a disability, well, I don't want to live with my parents any longer than my brother wants to live with my parents. But I've got a relationship with my neighbor that I've had forever, and maybe I'll move in with my neighbor. Now, my neighbor's been vetted, they've had training, and I become a tenant in their home, but it's support. And my neighbor gets a daily rate because I'm living with my neighbor now, or I'm living with some friends of mine. Other states have been doing this for years. Well, where group homes have a 60% turnover rate, the turnover rate for shared living is very, very low because you match people. And people say, well, if I couldn't have my son living with me, how can they? Could you live with your parents? I mean, there is a dynamic in every human being where we get to the point where we want to spread our wings and go somewhere else. And maybe I can live with my aunt and uncle, but not my parents. Or I can live with someone else, but not my parents. It doesn't mean my parents are still part of my family, but I'm just not living with them. I've got my own house now. And we've seen in the rest of the country where these relationships last for decades, not for a month or two. And it's not a group home. I'm living with another family, or I'm living with a group of people that I chose. Yes.
Is that something that could start with your own family and then transfer over to?
Yes, yes. Or many families would do things like, mom will be the shared living provider from Monday through Friday, and then another provider comes in the home on the weekends. If we're not tax attorneys, and he gets upset when I say this, but the Internal Revenue Service has determined in most cases, if parents are taking care of their own adult son or daughter, that income is tax exempt. There's a provision, you know what the code is?
We're not saying it is.
Especially on
You
tape,
would
we're not
consult,
saying this.
but I think the IRS form is 2014-7. I don't know that for sure, so don't hold me to that.
But if you're paid to care for your own son or daughter, who is an adult, not a child, under shared living, then it's tax exempt. Many families say, well, I don't want paid to do this. Well, once it gets in your wallet, it's your money, and you can do whatever you want with it. A number of our middle income families are taking the $100 a day they're getting and putting that in the trust fund. The middle income families, they don't have extra money, but I'm gonna be dad anyway, so it's a way, and it can, from the arts perspective as a family organization, I know, shut up, Gary. This keeps the family together. As Amy said, if that's your choice,
Yes.
this is another option as a means to continue the family dynamic.
I just wanted to clarify something when Gary talked about being a shared living provider and then also having other providers. You cannot bill those on the same day. So like if you're billing shared living on a Monday, no other provider can come in and do like HPC services that same day. And that's HPC is Homemaker Personal Care Services. Okay.
But that's going to be the growing residential option. Now, waivers, this gets to the complicated part. This is an agreement with the state of Ohio has with the federal government to do these waivers. Remember, no one else has levies like we do. No one else has a county system. In Pennsylvania, they pay their taxes, that goes to Harrisburg, and it's evenly divided. So in Pennsylvania's case, the deal was just with Pennsylvania. We've got our county boards. Waivers must be statewide. So we've got some counties who are not as progressive as Cuyahoga in giving people waivers. Well, that offsets the statistics. We have to make sure as Ohio to the federal government that our waivers are statewide. And Cuyahoga can't have any more waivers percentage-wise than Lorain County has. They happen to be, even though Cuyahoga and Franklin, where we live, has more money to do waivers, they've got the 40%. The state, every once in a while, has to balance things out. So every 2 years, when we adopt the state budget, for the last several budgets, the state will give out state-funded waivers. So the counties are putting up most of the 40% match. But every 2 years, the state of Ohio has been putting up 40% match for state-funded waivers, especially for counties who say they can't afford the 40% match. When the state has done that to promote shared living, they will, even with Cuyahoga County, say, here, Cuyahoga, we're giving you 2 individual options waivers, but you can only use them for shared living. As a way to, jumpstart this residential program. The quality has been determined to be better. Families are either choosing themselves or choosing other families to help with their adult son or daughter. The quality's better. The turnover is next to nothing. And it turns out to be a lot less expensive than running a traditional group home. Group homes will continue, but probably not grow in numbers.
So when you're getting your assessment, could shared living be one of your needs then that is discussed in that?
Well, I would couch it differently, that I need help in these things. Part of it is I can't work outside the family home because of everything going on. And I've heard that shared living might help. I don't think it's a way to get an IO waiver. In your circumstances, you'll probably get a level 1 waiver before you would get an IO, I would think, if you got anything. Sir.
Does shared living provide transportation or no?
Yes.
Yes, it does.
Yes, so to get shared living, you have to have the individual options waiver. And each of the waivers has a menu of services, and transportation is one of the services. So you can be in shared living where your mom is getting, and I'm just using $100 a day, it varies. Your mom's getting $100 a day to be your caregiver if you need assistance, and then you'd also have a transportation budget. And either your mom would be providing the transportation, or do you use Uber here in Cuyahoga?
Yes.
Some counties have arranged to buy Uber vouchers, but you'd also have a budget for day services. So under the individual options waiver, you've got a budget for home and travel into the community, and then you've also got a budget for a day service and transportation to the day service. Yes?
Can there be more than one person with a disability in a shared living situation?
Yes, you can have up to 3 people living together. And then it's not $300 a day, there's a group rate. And again, it's not a set 100. You get the amount of money based on an assessment that's done called a developmental disability profile. And that determines your budget. Remember, this is only in the IO waiver, this is not in the level 1 or the self. The other waiver I wanted to talk a little bit about, and again, you're not asking for a specific waiver. You do the assessment, and the county determines which waiver best meets your need. Our newest waiver is called the self waiver. It started out as the autism waiver, but many of us said there are just as many people with cerebral palsy and Down syndrome that need services. So let's not just make it for people with autism. But because it started as the autism waiver, it has behavioral therapy in it, which the other waivers don't include. But it also has a component that we want, and the county boards actually want to grow. It's something called participant-directed goods and services. We've had a lot of challenges with it, but the traditional waiver gives you a menu of services that you have to buy those services from a certified provider. So I want my child to go to camp. That camp has to, in the traditional waivers, be certified by the Department of Developmental Disabilities, and traditionally would be an agency that only serves people with developmental disabilities. The self waiver says, if you've got a child who has a self waiver and you want them to go to the Boy Scout camp, that Boy Scout camp doesn't have to be certified. And oh, by the way, it doesn't include all people with disabilities. It's an inclusive setting. The self waiver could be used for Boy Scout camp or church camp. The rule that's not really written, but it's a standard, is if the majority of an agency's customers have disabilities, they have to jump through the hoops and be certified by the state of Ohio. If the majority of their customers are not people with disabilities, they don't have to be certified. You just, the other example was if you've ever bought a therapy ball through an agency, it might be $500 for one of those big rubber balls. You go to Walmart, it might be $75. The self-waiver says you can go to Walmart and get it for $75. Follow the money on many of these things a lot. We've made a lot of philosophical decisions over the years on what's best. Government finally figured out, well, Walmart could do it just as easily. So why would Walmart get certified? Under assistive technology, with the traditional waivers, we were the organization that fought hard that you could buy an iPad with a waiver. And Medicaid had always said you could buy a $12,000 communication board with your Medicaid card. And we said, well, you can buy a $500 iPad for the same thing. But Apple didn't want to become certified as a Medicaid provider. So we fought to say waivers can pay for an iPad if an iPad is used for activities of daily living, like reminders to get me up or talking. You can buy an app that you can talk with an iPad now. But Apple wasn't certified. So Dave has an IT background. We got certified as a technology provider. The self-waiver, you can buy an iPad from Apple if you want, or you could buy it from an organization like the ARC that is a nonprofit that doesn't mark it up. If you're buying technology, there's not a set rule or rate for the technology. It's whatever the agency's usual and customary rate is. Right. We found agencies charging $1,000 for a $500 iPad because the system was willing to pay for it. If you've ever heard of the Knights of Columbus, Thank a Knight, the Knights has given us how much money in the last 3 years?
About 90.
About $90,000 to supplement our technology program. So we've been able to get iPads at cost and other pieces of technology.
We also work with what are called sustainable green companies. So your big corporations, their staff, like I also use Nationwide as an example, they got 500 IT people. Their staff get new laptops and new iPads every couple of years. There's nothing wrong with that older generation of an iPad. Working with sustainable green companies, they donate those to the ARC, and then we're able to give those out to people who do not have any funding, whether that's Medicaid, waivers, local funding. So it's really a cool program.
So up at the front, there's a list of the waivers we've talked about and the menu of services you can get. Remember, the home care waiver on here is not a DD waiver. We put it on the list because we all know people that have medical issues. This would be for preemies, people with medical issues that don't really qualify for DD services. Especially some people with cerebral palsy could get served under the home care waiver if they had a lot of medical issues. And there's virtually no line for this waiver.
Can I just say something about what you were talking about with the self-waiver with participating American Goods and Services? You did mention that it's a challenge, and it is, and although these services are available under the self-waiver, if a person has a self-waiver and wants to purchase, say, a therapy ball from Walmart, the budget, the money actually isn't with the individual, so does have to have an authorization process. I just want to make sure that's clear.
Right.
And it also still has to be based on assessed need an outcome in the plan, medical necessity, least costly alternative, and to meet a need. So I mean, it does have some criteria that we absolutely have to make sure, but it does make non-adaptive camps and things that you mentioned available, more community integration available, and items like tablet technology and things much more available and easy.
Yeah, so just like the assistive technology program, if a waiver is using to pay for that, there's guidelines that you have to go through that process. So that's getting those assessments. And again, in this brochure, it actually has the guidelines for you. But the kind of cool thing about the ARC's assistive technology program is, again, getting those donations that we roll back into the program. So we have a lot of conversations with people who maybe can't afford that $500 tablet or iPad, but maybe they can afford a couple $100. So we have those conversations.
But thanks for bringing that up. It's sometimes I'm just kind of, but it's, again, it's been not based on, I want
Yes.
this, it's I need it, and it has to be backed up by a professional saying I need it. Speech therapists are good at documenting that, yeah, he needs an iPad to be able to communicate. Most counties will work with you and they'll guide you in the right direction for that. When I said waivers are a budget, that's not a budget that you ever get money from. It's
not.
it's a budget, but someone else is paying the bills. So you don't ever touch the money, which means it never becomes taxable income for you. You just have it's like a voucher program, in essence.
Now, did you say shared living is free?
You have to have an individual options waiver to get it. So it doesn't cost you anything, but you have to have one of these waivers. Just like you have to have a waiver to buy a group home placement, you have to have a waiver to buy shared living.
Okay, so if I was to move into shared living, would I lose my SSI check?
No, no. SSI was created so that it would pay your room and board. So your SSI check or Social Security when your parents retire would pay your room and board, and the waiver pays for the staff to support you in whatever setting you choose.
And would parents need any certification
Okay, and your child has to be at least 18 before the parents can do it. It depends. If parents have two options under shared living, you could be certified as an independent provider by the state of Ohio and bill the state directly, or you could have a contract with an agency that's certified. So the ARC is certified as an agency. Mentor in this area is certified as an agency. Do you know any other ones that do shared? Koinonia does.
And
Caregiver homes, are they here? But there are agencies, like there are foster care agencies that have the certification, and you would just have a contract with them. There's not much difference between the pay
Instead
that
of parents billing it, they would bill it?
they would bill it.
Right, so for us, we take care of, like, if somebody's contracted with us as a shared living provider, we're the ones that are doing all the billing, all the paperwork. So we would have a contract with you, and again, there's gonna be certain documentation we have to follow.
So you'd have to be, you'd have to have a criminal background check, even though you're dad. You'd have to have first aid and CPR training, and there's some online, they're really not hard tests. No, working for an agency, you don't have to pay any fees. Working for the state directly, you do have to pay some fees. So there are pluses and benefits to working for an agency. Agencies will take anywhere from about 15% to, we found one that takes half, 50%. So you shop around to see who would, and there are some administrative things the agency has to do, but 15 is usually the low end, 50 is by far the high end.
And again, remember that $100 figure that Gary keeps throwing out there, that's just an estimate, because it's all based on that ODDP funding, and then there's also something called cost of doing business categories throughout the state, and there's 8 categories, so.
So you had a question?
Does having guardianship of your adult child affect shared
That's-
living or any of this?
It's a very good question. Ohio law says that a provider can't be a guardian, except if they're a parent. Okay? It's weird. So like REM, who is a major provider in this area, can't be a guardian for the people they serve, but a parent can. But to complicate it, the Ohio Supreme Court a couple years ago had found some guardians that were not really doing right by the people they were wards or guardians for. So the Ohio Supreme Court said they would leave it up to the local probate judge as to whether the guardian can also be a parent and a provider. And most parents who are guardians also have to have training now. But they never consulted the local judges when they made this decision. So it depends on the probate judge whether they enforce it or not.
I can tell you in Summit County, it's difficult. for
Summit
example.
County enforces it. Most of the rural counties, the judges know parents by name. You know, there's Oh, yeah, sure, you can do, yeah. So it just depends on your local probate judge. But advocacy-wise, get to know your probate judge and your county commissioners and your board members. It helps.
I have an assistive technology question.
Sure.
You mentioned getting the iPad through the waiver program, but I guess maybe it might be more related to you. If they were going to do that, it has to be approved by the board's assistive technology committee. Is that correct?
All tablet technology, if there's an assessment that's been done to indicate that somebody needs a tablet or a communication device, then it does go through a committee just to look at the assessments to make sure that we're approving that purchase and it meets a person's assessed need, outcomes, medical necessities.
Right, and the brochure we've got down here tells you what those things are. Okay, so we have the Medicaid program for the county boards, but schools have a Medicaid program as well, where they can use the Medicaid card to purchase these things. But they have to be used in school for educational purposes. And the difference is when a county board uses waiver funds to purchase technology, the technology belongs to the person. When the school district purchases technology to be used for a child, the technology belongs to the school. We're doing some seminars for SSAs, Service and Support Administrators, and providers. We're going to start with the providers first. We're going to be doing a webinar on how to speak nice to families. And it shouldn't be all that tough. I don't know if you know a lady by the name of Peggy Martin. She served as an advocate for the state for years. But Peggy, Dave, and I are going to try to teach providers how to say nice things and just communicate. As a former provider, when I was 22, sometimes you're put in the position of, I'm the lowest on the food chain, and I gotta give at least the impression that I know what I'm talking about. And I regret some things I said at 22 to families when I thought at that point I had to know it because they were coming to me for knowledge. Now, if I don't know it, I don't have a clue. But it's hard when you're younger or inexperienced or you know you're at the bottom of the food chain to actually say that.
I think it's hard too when the system is constantly changing. So we're here talking about certain things that maybe that hasn't gotten from Columbus yet to the counties, or it's not been relayed to them maybe in the same way. So I think sometimes that's a little challenging. And it's unfortunate, but that's kind of why we want to do these kind of forums for families and for SSAs to talk about these things. It's not that, I mean, back to basics. It's not that hard to be nice to people, right?
Yes.
Just one of the hardest conversations that we have with individuals and families, especially families with aging caregivers, aging parents, is how does my adult child move out? And you talked about this, and Amy, you talked about this. If they need the supports that you were providing to them in the home 24 hours a day, and there isn't an immediate need, as we talked about, like something really, there's a real risky situation that's going to happen within 30 days. We have a lot of those situations in our county, and those folks, it's the old rule, those were our emergencies, and we have a budget to be able to help those folks first, to make sure that those emergencies, people who are homeless, people who don't have caregivers anymore because parents have passed away, they were the ones to get that funding for those 24-hour supports. It's hard to talk to a person and plan with them if their child may not fit in that criteria.
Right.
Because that funding may not be available right now for that 24-hour support. So it is a conversation about what are your thoughts about that? What is there a job? Is there an income? Are there natural supports? Is there a place that you thought that your child can live? We don't have houses that are out there and available for people just to move into because there's a lot that goes into that. So it is about a conversation.
Right.
And I hope that our approach always is about having that conversation, and if it's not like that, that I do apologize for that, but it's about having a conversation, asking those challenging questions about what do your plans look like, what's the contribution, or what have you thought about, and how can we help?
Right.